Today is Minnesota Public Radio Day at the fair, and if you're coming out, bundle up, first of all. If you're coming out, bundle up, but stop by, say hello. We're located right in front of the grandstand. Without further ado, let's get to our debate. All three major party candidates for governor have joined us this morning on stage for another in what's turning out to be a series of debates that they've been holding around the state. Format for this one is pretty simple. Each candidate will get 30 seconds at the end of the program to make a pitch for your support. But meantime, I'll have some questions for the candidates. Those of you here in the audience, if you have a question, just raise your hand, and Jim Bickle or Curtis Gilbert will get a microphone to you. So raise your hand. If you're listening on the radio or the web, give us a call, 651-227-6000 or 1-800-242-2828. You can also send in your question or comment on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/MPRNewsQ or send in your question online. Go to mprnewsq.org and click on Send a Question. And if you're online, you can watch the program. We're webcasting today's debate at mprnewsq.org. Just a couple of requests for those of you here in the audience, and on the phone for that matter. If you have a question for the candidates, please keep it short, to the point. Make sure it's a question for all three candidates. And, you know, let's have some fun here, but be polite. Give the candidates an opportunity to have their say and let everybody be able to hear what they're saying. So let's meet the candidates, alphabetical order. DFLer Mark Dayton. Republican Tom Emmer. Independence Party candidate Tom Horner. Gentlemen, we've heard a lot of talk about the main job facing the next governor will be trying to balance the budget. The premise is that there is about a $6 billion budget deficit that the state faces. Tom Emmer, as I understand it, you're thinking maybe there isn't such a deficit to worry about. Is that true?
Gary, there's going to be important decisions that have to be made regardless, but people need to understand that right now this state is spending roughly $30 billion this biennium. Based on revenue projections, current revenue projections, the state, the next governor, the next legislature will have roughly $3 billion more to spend. Only in government, Gary, can you call an increase in revenues a decrease. Only in government can you call it a deficit. Yes, there will be difficult decisions that have to be made, no doubt. But if you look at where we're going with revenues, the next governor, the next legislature will actually have almost 7 to 8% more in revenue to spend. The problem is that government in this state has scheduled itself not for a 7 or 8% raise, it's scheduled itself for a 17% raise. That's something you got to start to budget. Government needs to budget within what it has. You have to figure out what your priorities are, set your priorities, then purchase those priorities, those core services with the money you have, instead of taking the attitude government always takes, which is, what do we want, and then you all have to just pay more so we can buy it.
Mark Dayton, is there in fact a $6 billion deficit?
Yes, there's a projected $5.8 billion deficit, which does not factor in inflation. And Representative Emmer, you know, this is the 126th day since you've been endorsed by your party, and you still haven't answered that question. How would you eliminate a $5.8 billion deficit? Mr. Horner has made a proposal. I made a proposal. You know, there's no popular way. These are unpopular realities that one of us is going to inherit. I think, you know, with 60 days left in this campaign, it's important that you give the people of Minnesota the facts about how you're going to eliminate that deficit.
What about the argument, Tom Horner, that there is in fact all this additional revenue that the state will have to work with? How can that be described as a deficit?
Well, there is some additional revenue, but it can be described as a deficit because regardless of what Representative Emmer just said, the legislature, including Representative Emmer, dug a deeper hole than what the 7% will cover. I mean, the legislature spent, Representative Emmer spent money that it didn't have. So now it gets revenue, but it has to pay back. It has to pay back schools, it has to pay back communities. It's even borrowing from small businesses, asking them to accelerate their payments on sales taxes. That's what's outrageous. I mean, just to say that there's a 7% increase in revenue doesn't account for the additional money that was borrowed. We have a $6 billion deficit next year because the legislature this year didn't fix a $3 billion deficit.
May I just add, Gary, please, that there's... the facts also are that both revenues and state spending in this biennium are less than they were the previous biennium. Spending is down over 8% in this biennium. The tax structure has not been changed. The reason revenues are projected to increase in the next biennium is because more people are going to be working in Minnesota. That's what we want. We want more people working in this state and paying taxes.
Tom Emmer, final comment on that?
Well, it's interesting that we've got two people that just talk about more revenues. That's the answer that they have. The state needs more revenues. You know, you got families out there, Senator, that are struggling to pay the bills, struggling to put food on the table and clothes on their kids. And you talk about a plan, all you're doing with the plan is saying government needs more revenue. What about the people that are out there? And I'll tell you what, we will be offering a plan, but our plan is going to work for all of Minnesotans, not just for a few. It's going to work for everybody.
Well, Quick comment, first of all, Tom Horner.
Then Representative Emmer, you need to get the plan out there so that we can see what it is.
Mark Dayton.
Because what I've put out there is a plan that does reduce government spending, but it reforms taxes. It says we do need some revenue to make sure that small businesses have the tax reform that they need to grow and create jobs, that we have revenue to invest in early childhood learning, in older adult services, while we reduce spending. It is not just about whether we're getting more revenue or cutting spending. It is about what kind of a state do we want to live in, and what are we willing to do for that. Well, that's the issue.
Mr. Horner, here's the problem. Here's the problem, Gary. Here's the problem. You're talking about tax reform, but what you're talking about is taxing everything from, in order to get to the numbers that you're talking about, business as usual again. You're not willing to redesign government. You're not willing to give people back more of their money. In fact, now you want to tax garage sales. You want to tax the kid in the street who's doing the lawn service. This is not the answer for Minnesota. This is business as usual. It's time for government to start to be efficient and allow people to do what they do best. Create jobs, create opportunity.
Quick comment.
And Representative Emmer, let me just say that it is an answer, and no answer is not an answer. Just to keep saying, trust me, I'll have something out there. I've been willing to put myself out there. Now, you can talk about garage sales and lawn mowing services. Come on, you know that's not the issue. That's just.
Well, what aren't you going to tax?
I'm going to reduce.
What are you not going to tax?
I'll tell you what I'm going to. I'll tell you exactly.
What are you not going to tax?
Representative, I'll tell you, but everybody who goes to Horner 2010 can see exactly what I'm going to do.
Well, why don't you tell them what you're not going to tax?
I'm going to lower the rate of sales tax, so if you're out there buying appliances and furniture, you pay less. I'm going to reduce taxes on small businesses, so that if you're a small business person wanting to invest in new jobs, to buy new equipment, to invest in research development, you're going to have that opportunity. And I am going to say we need to have the revenue to invest in a better Minnesota. So would I extend the sales tax to clothing and to some personal services while exempting food and medical services? Yeah, because that's the way we're going to have a better Minnesota. And I understand that it's not popular, but you know what? Leadership is willing to put yourself out there to say this is what Minnesota needs. And I'll say this, Representative Emmer, leadership is being willing to say something today and the same thing tomorrow and the same thing next week. Leadership is about trust. It is about being willing to say, you know where I stand, you know you can trust me, you know that you can depend on a governor who is going to look for great ideas, not Republican ideas, not Democratic ideas, but great ideas and move Minnesota forward.
Mark Dayton, should the state decline federal money that the state would be eligible for under the new federal health care law, as Governor Plenty has?
No, I think Governor Plenty is running for president, and he's abandoned Minnesota's best interest, and that's all of our interest. You know, this is Medicaid money. Medicaid was started in 1965 when Barack Obama was less than 4 years old. This is not the new health care.
Well, there's some of each. There's some of each, as I understand.
Well, primarily Medicaid in terms of, first of all, $263 million that would come this year, you know, as Mr. Horner was pointing out, the state is right now delaying payments once again to schools, once again to the University of Minnesota. They're delaying the refund to businesses on the sales tax and their capital equipment expenditures. That's exactly what we want businesses to do, to be expanding and creating new jobs, because the state doesn't have the money. So not to take that money, $230 million of which goes to the bottom line, provides the cash to refund businesses, to fund schools, tuitions, and the like, is just senseless. Then the next January, we would make for a net investment of $188 billion. We'd get a $1.4 billion return from the state, from the federal government. That's a 7 times return on the state expenditure, which has already been budgeted for by the last legislature that Representative Emmer was a part of. And importantly, in addition to providing health care to the poorest of the poor, it provides especially the rural hospitals in Minnesota with the financial stability they need to provide health care for all of us.
Tom Emmer, is Governor Pawlenty on the right track here in terms of turning down some of that federal money under the new federal health care law?
Well, Gary, I haven't read the grant proposals and what strings are attached. So whatever Governor Pawlenty's doing is for Governor Pawlenty. I think anybody that's in this position has to look at whatever federal monies are offered and see what strings come attached. Because the senator talks about how, and you ran 2 programs together, by the way, Senator. There's 2 different programs. There's the early opt-in, and then there's the so-called money with no strings attached. If you look at the money with no strings attached, you've got to start doing a due diligence and figure out, if we take this money, are there really no strings attached, or are we obligating our kids and future leaders to financial obligations that they can't meet? That's all I do.
Mark Dayton, quick response.
Governor Pawlenty's own Commissioner of Management and Budget told the Legislative Commission on Fiscal Policy last month that $230 million would drop to the bottom line, would be available for the state for its diminishing cash reserves. That's what Governor Pawlenty's own administration is telling the legislature.
Tom Horner?
Well, look, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the big chunk of the money, $260 million, was money that Governor Pawlenty and the Republicans in the legislature had in their budget in January to say this is how we're going to balance the state budget. Apparently there were no strings attached then. I don't know how 8-9 months later, all of a sudden, it becomes money that has baggage tied to it. But secondly, look, I mean, should we be taking federal money in order to reform health care in Minnesota, in order to make sure that we can create a lower cost, higher quality health care system? Absolutely. And that starts with providing coverage to more Minnesotans. So let me tell you what this really is, because there have been some complicated issues that have bounced around in this campaign. One of them is nullification, the ability of states to, like Minnesota, in Representative Emmer's view, to be an island unto itself. This really is the face of nullification. I mean, this is what you get with nullification is, I don't want to be part of the federal government, we're going to turn down federal money, and we're going to turn down the federal opportunity to create a better health care system in Minnesota.
Actually, Gary, you know, I got to respond to that.
This is Tom Emmer.
This is actually the face of common sense. This is still doing business as usual. You want to take this position where I'm not for this and I'm not for that, but in actuality, you're for doing business the same way we've been doing it for years. Folks, is what we're doing right now working? No, it's not working. And every time you get a politician who says, we're just going to wait for the federal government to tell us this is what's good for us, we should evaluate every federal dollar that comes into Minnesota. Absolutely. If it helps Minnesotans, we should take it. If it obligates Minnesotans to things that are going to cause trouble in the future, it takes leadership. You got to say what's good for Minnesota. You got to stand by. You can't just take it because somebody in Washington tells you this is good for you.
Well, so Representative Emmer, you did a great job of building a cheering section out here, and I know you've got a lot of passionate fans. So let me ask them this. Is leadership putting out a specific plan that people can have a sense of, can vote on, and can understand where you stand?
Mark Dayton?
Well, this is first in the financial health of the state. It's about responsible financial management. It's about paying the businesses and the schools what they're owed. The larger issue in January is about the financial health of Minnesotans and the hospitals, especially rural hospitals. There's a reason that when the legislature and the governor worked out a so-called GMC compromise in the spring, that only 4 of the 21 hospitals could afford to take part in it, which means, as my running mates pointed out, one of her clients, it's been in the press, so I can say, a young man with schizophrenia in Duluth has to have his mother leave her job in Albert Lea, drive to Duluth, drive him down to the Twin Cities so he can get his medications, drive him back to Duluth, drive back to Albert Lea. This is is about preventing financial bankruptcy of rural hospitals and their emergency rooms to provide health care for all of Minnesota. It's common sense financial management.
If you just tuned in, this is Midday coming to you live today from the Minnesota State Fair. We're at Carousel Park on Minnesota Public Radio Day. We have been joined here on stage by the three major party candidates for governor: Independence Party candidate Tom Horner, Republican Tom Emmer, DFLer Mark Dayton. Lively crowd here at Carousel Park, and no question about it. Now, we're going to get to audience questions. If you're listening on the radio, give us a call at 651-227-6000, 1-800-242-2828. You can also send your question in via Facebook or online, so take advantage of that. And if you're listening online, take a look. We're webcasting this debate. Let's go to the audience. Jim Bickle, please.
Gary, I'm here with Jim from Little Falls. He has a question about the environment.
My concern is we live in Little Falls on the river, and our concern is we need some help to clean up the river, and we have a national treasure with the Mississippi and 10,000 lakes. As a governor, how can we help all of us in the state of Minnesota and further down the line? Thank you.
Tom Horner.
I think this is one of those areas that is most important to Minnesota, particularly after the Supreme Court decision earlier this year that I think does put water quality in greater jeopardy and our ability to protect water quality. So we need to do a couple of things. One is that I was sorely disappointed when Governor Pawlenty rejected the recommendations from his own DNR commission on good approaches to maintaining and managing water quality. I think this is an area where we need state and local government cooperation to set best practices on shoreline ordinances, on building ordinances, so that people can use their private property, can build, but that we're protecting water quality. But then we need to go beyond that. We need to use some of the CRP grants to make sure that we're building out easements along drainage ditches to protect the water quality. All of these kinds of things that are vitally important that take some leadership to get things done.
Mark Dayton.
Well, I said the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has become the Minnesota Pollution Cooperation Agency, and they have failed, the DNR has failed to provide the quality services that Minnesota's taxpayers need and deserve. I believe in better government, and I can count, I've had 110 community meetings around the state. I can count on one hand with fingers left over the number of people who said to me, I'm getting better service from a state agency under Governor Pawlenty and his predecessors than I was before. This is about government that does the job, and when a recent expose on our failure of our water cleanup policies in Minnesota and practices said the purpose of the exercise now is to have a plan. It's not results, it's to have a plan. Oh, that's ridiculous. If I'm governor, we're going to appoint commissioners who are actually qualified for the agencies that they head. They're going to believe in the missions of the agencies that they serve, and they're going to go to work for the people of Minnesota.
Tom Emmer.
Well, you know what? It's funny how my colleagues here talk about how awful it is. You know, we all, and this is not a party thing. This has nothing to do with being a Democrat or a Republican or other. This has to do with being a Minnesotan. We all are proud of our natural resources in Minnesota. We all want clean air and clean water. We need to start celebrating the fact that our lakes are cleaner today than they were in the 1970s. Our air is better quality today than it was in the 1970s. Can we do better? Absolutely, but more government is not the answer. It's problem we've got is we've got too much government already. You've got agency after agency with overlapping jurisdiction. Let's streamline the process so we can deliver whatever we need to efficiently.
All right, back to the audience here. Curtis Gilbert standing by. Curtis.
Gary, I'm here with Nathan. He's from Bemidji. He's leaning towards supporting Tom Emmer, the Republican, but he has a question for all three candidates.
Hi guys, my question is on the economy. We just in the last break heard the unemployment rate went back up after a $800 billion stimulus in the summer of recovery. So my question is primarily for Senator Dayton, but I'd like to hear all three of your answers. Tell me how the same economic policies that at the federal level have stifled. I'm from outstate Minnesota. Outstate Minnesota is heavy on small business, agriculture, and manufacturing. So tell me how the same economic policies that are not working at the federal level are not going to continue to exacerbate the problem in outstate Minnesota.
Mark Dayton.
Good question. And this is an American question. You know, what they're calling the Great Recession, the economic meltdown, happened with the 9 months remaining in President Bush's term, and has continued in.
All right, let him speak.
Those that are listening on the radio, it's very hard to continue a conversation.
Let
I'll
candidates
pick it up
have
now.
their say anyway, and then you can cheer and stuff.
That's fair.
Okay.
That's fair. Thanks, Gary. So, and as I was going to say, it's continued under President Obama. And this is American challenge. You know, over 8 million jobs left this country, and a lot of them aren't coming back. I've been to China 7 times, 6 times in this last decade. I've seen some of those 1.3 billion people willing to work and work very hard for 50, 60 cents an hour, 120 hours a week. At jobs that used to be here, it's better than 2 cents an hour in the village. This is the American challenge. If I were president, I'd take every economist, Democrat, Republican, left and right, and put them in a room and say, don't leave until you figure out what is our strategy. How do we put Minnesotans, how do we put Americans back to work? Now in Minnesota, we've had a little bit of an uptick. But we still have fewer people working today in Minnesota than we did 8 years ago. And the next governor is going to face that challenge. I believe we need to invest in education. We need a bonding bill next year. I think we need an energy savings fund to retrofit all of our buildings, put people back to work in the building trade. We need to put 8,000 people to work building a Viking stadium that's in the public interest, the people's stadium. There are things government can do, and there are policies that absolutely we need. And we also need to stop killing business with small property tax increases. You know, we get businesses and people in Minnesota are paying $3 billion more in property taxes today than they were 7 years ago. We've got to bring the property tax rate down, and we've got to streamline government, get out of the way of business creation, and then make government a partner rather than a barrier.
Tom Emmer.
Well, I don't think we need to put all the economists in the country in a room to figure out what the problem is. The problem is that government has grown so big in this state, it is literally suffocating the private economy. You want to put people back to work in the state of Minnesota, you've got to reduce the size of government, you've got to reduce taxes, eliminate the excessive and unnecessary regulatory environment we have in this state. You've got to allow the entrepreneurs, the people that understand what risk is, you've got to allow them to invest in Minnesota and start to create jobs again in this state, because you want to talk about a plan. It's not about just more revenue to keep feeding government and allow it to grow. It's about streamlining government and then allowing people to grow new opportunities, new jobs. That will generate revenue that will pay for what you expect from government.
Tom Horner.
Well, I believe the question was, how are we going to help small businesses in rural Minnesota grow jobs? That was the question. I'm the only one that has actually put out a plan. And we need to do things like you talk about my sales tax, but I'm the only one to say we ought to eliminate the sales tax on capital equipment purchases so all of these small manufacturing plants around Minnesota, the 10 and 12 person shops, can invest in the new equipment, can create a new line, can stay competitive. Secondly, we need to make sure that our 2- and 4-year schools, particularly our 2-year VOTEX and community colleges, are closely integrated to the local economies. That they're providing the research, the knowledge, the skills, the training that is needed by our local companies to grow and to create new jobs. Thirdly, I agree, we do need to streamline government, but we need to do it in a way that says, look, we can set a guarantee that if you come and seek a permit, we'll give you an answer in no more than 6 months. And that's not unreasonable. We need to make sure that we expand broadband statewide. That's the economic generator of the future. That's the access to world-class education, world-class health care, world-class economic development opportunities. We need to invest in research at our 2- and 4-year schools so that we're creating new ideas, innovation, new technologies in green energy, in life sciences, in manufacturing that then can take root in Minnesota companies creating private sector jobs around the state. And lastly, we need to make sure that local communities have the resources, and part of that is local government assistance, to make sure that they have the resources to build out their infrastructure, that they have the industrial parks, that they have the roads, that they have the other assets that they need to leverage their regional economic advantages to grow and create jobs.
Let me sneak a question in, if I may. Lots of talk during the campaign about redesigning government and the rest. Should Minnesota shut down some of its higher education campuses? Mark Dayton.
I don't believe so. You know, those are very important economic engines for those areas in greater Minnesota. You know, if you look at the communities in Minnesota that are thriving in greater Minnesota, they're almost always connected to a MnSCU campus, a community college, a technical college, a four-year university, provide jobs. Then the public sector does provide important jobs, and it provides well-educated people. It brings young people there. It really is part of the economic vitality. You can go community by community throughout greater Minnesota, and as I say, you'll see the marked difference, those that have a public college or university and those that don't.
Tom Horner?
Well, I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, how do we take advantage of an environment next year when, probably for the only time in my lifetime, we will have a new president of the university, a new chancellor of the Minnesota State Colleges and University System, and a new governor. We need to take advantage of that opportunity to have a statewide conversation that starts with the question of what do we need out of our higher education institutions, both our 2- and 4-year schools. And when we have that conversation, then I think we do need to put everything on the table. And we need to be asking, what are the core missions at each level? How do we fund it? How do we make sure that higher education is affordable for kids coming into school and affordable coming out, so that we're not saddling them with $40,000, $50,000 in debt? How do we make sure that we're asking the questions of, do we have too many bricks and mortar or not enough bricks and mortar? But you start with the outcomes. What is it that we need to achieve? And I believe that it is only an independent thinking governor who can ask all of the questions, put all of the questions on the table, and get the real answers.
Tom Emmer?
I think what you asked was whether we should be closing some of our MnSCU campuses, and I don't think that's the first question that you asked. The first question that has to be asked is, we need to identify, do we need the full menu of offerings at every MnSCU campus? Are they delivering what they're supposed to? Should we be specializing different campuses? For instance, up in Fergus Falls, should it be public safety? Down in Rochester, should it be medical careers? Those types of things. We should be looking at that. Then we should look at the resources that are going in and ask, do we have too much administration? Is enough going into the classroom? Is enough providing the access for kids to get the education they need? And only then, Gary, then you look at, do we have the right number, or do we need less? Do we need more?
Back to the audience here. Go, Mark Dayton.
I agree with Representative Emmer. There are 302 people in the MnSCU administration that make more money than the governor. Nobody in state government, except for some of the health doctors, get allowed to do so. So when you talk about streamlining administration and the MnSCU system, as well as the state agencies, what some people call lop the top, eliminating positions that have been layered in the administrative layer, the highest paid positions, I absolutely agree.
Now let's go back to the audience. Jim Bickle, please.
I'm here with Patricia from Minneapolis. She has a question about government's role in the prevention of bullying.
If you were elected governor, and this is a yes/no question, and the legislature passed the Minnesota State Schools anti-bullying legislation, would you sign it?
Tom Emmer?
I'd have to see what it looks like. Unfortunately, you don't get, I'll tell you right now, bullying is a serious issue. You're talking to the parent of 7 kids. Jackie and I have 7 kids. We're very well aware of what happens when a child is faced with an uncomfortable situation at school or out in a public place. But I'll tell you what, it's up to Jackie and I to educate our children how they handle that situation. We're the ones that have to be the front line of defense for our children. I don't want the government doing that for us.
Tom Horner?
It's a simple question that deserves a simple answer. Yes.
Mark Dayton?
My answer is yes. And when Rochester years ago, over a decade, Somali youth was beaten by a couple of white youth, I went down and met with the mayor and the others, and they initiated a program, to their great credit, the chamber and everybody, not in our city. And it was a year-long program. We need to make it clear, not in our schools, not in our cities, not in our state.
Back to the audience. Curtis Gilbert, please.
Yes, Gary, I'm here with Lori. She's an undecided voter from White Bear Lake, and she has a question about how K-12 schools raise money in this state.
Thank you. My question is, similar to the authority that is given cities and counties, would you as governor support a bill that would allow local school boards to renew existing operating levy referendums to continue funding of our public schools?
Without a vote.
without voter approval?
Tom Horner?
If there are limitations on it and if it's a straight renewal, yes.
Mark Dayton?
Strictly limited to renewal of previously approved operating deficits, but the bigger issue is that there shouldn't require property taxes to pay for operating deficits. Shouldn't require property taxes to pay for operating of our school districts. The Minnesota Supreme Court ruled over 40 years ago that was unconstitutional. It's inherently unequal. That's why we need a progressive income tax so that we can fund our schools. I will increase state funding for public K-12 education every year I'm governor. No excuses, no exceptions.
Tom Emmer?
Senator Dayton, that sounds great, but under the plan that you've provided, it appears that in order to get to the revenues that you want to generate out of Minnesotans, you're going to have to raise the tax rate to 17 or 18%. How high are you willing to go?
I've said that I will not make Minnesota the highest tax rate in the country, Mr. Representative Emmer. And once again, if you'll provide your plan, then we can compare my plan and Mr. Horner's plan with your plan. But until you provide a plan, I think it's really hypocritical for you to be questioning ours.
Well, I have to, Senator Dayton, because I've read your plan, and in your plan it says we don't have the computer modeling capability to show you that this will in fact work. And when you take what you put in your 3 or 4 page plan that's going to raise taxes for Minnesotans, certain Minnesotans, actually all the way down to the middle class, it's going to hammer the middle class and mom and pop businesses all over this state.
A couple making $173,000 a year as middle class, Representative Emmer?
I respect yours, but I appreciate it. You're going to have to raise it to 17 or 18%, and it's easy to say, I'm not going to make it the highest, but California, I believe, is the highest. It has the highest rate, 10 or 11%. Yours would have to be 17 or 18%. Can you tell the people that are here, can you tell us how high are you willing to raise the rate?
Go ahead.
Hawaii has the highest rate, 11%, and I've said I will keep it below that rate. I'll keep it below 11%. And again, the difference is that, at least so far, neither of the others want to raise taxes on people making $1 million or $5 million or $10 million a year. They believe they should not pay 1 penny more in income taxes. Meanwhile, Mr. Horner is extending the sales tax to clothing and to services. That falls on all Minnesotans, but it's a regressive tax. It falls harder on middle-income families, working families. Mr. Representative Emmer, when you come out with your plan, so far anyway, you said you want to eliminate local government aids. You said on Almanac you want to cut state funding for public K-12 education by 19%. Those are also going to raise property taxes. Property tax is a much more unfair tax. It falls on people with limited fixed income, senior citizens. It drives them out of their homes.
Gary,
so there's the difference between a progressive tax and a regressive tax.
Gary, two things.
Just a quick clarification here from Senator Dayton. So your tax increase would not exceed, say, 12%.
I said we'll keep it under the current highest rate, Gary, which is 11% in Hawaii.
Okay.
Two things. First, that's absolutely not true that I ever said we'd cut K-12 education. That's not true, and we never have. You keep promoting that it's gone down. Even the Speaker of the House, Margaret Kelleher, called you to the carpet on that. The other one is I have never said that we're going to eliminate LGA. LGA should be applied to what it was intended for. It should pay for essential services defined as police and fire service and sewer and water infrastructure. That's what it should be going for, not to etch poetry and sidewalks in St. Paul. So that's what we've said.
So Tom Emmer, you would continue the LGA program with a few modifications?
No, I would redesign LGA to do what it was originally intended to do, which is provide communities that do not have the economic base to provide the essential services that government must provide when it comes to public safety and other health issues, when it comes to police and fire, sewer and water infrastructure, those types of things, instead of building fountains or etching poetry in sidewalks.
Tom Horner.
Well, these two gentlemen decide what each other is going to do. Let me tell you what I'm going to do so you get it right for me. We do need tax reform. We do need to reduce the taxes on small businesses, not to increase them as the way the individual income tax does, because this gentleman back here is right. I mean, small businesses are the jobs generators. We need to make sure they have the resources to invest. I am proposing that we reform the sales tax, lower the rate, broaden the base, and that could include clothing. But if you read my plan, I also have $350 million in there to guard against the regressivity. It is why every group that has looked at it, every group, from the business-led commission appointed by Governor Pawlenty to the more progressive Growth and Justice organization, has said sales tax is what we ought to look at for Minnesota so that we can make the investments in tax reform and have a tax system that is creating jobs. So look at the clothing tax. It puts Minnesota in line with most other states. I have $350 million in my budget plan to guard against the regressivity. We can do that through tax credits. We can do it by maybe we start the tax on clothing items at $100 and above. Maybe we do tax holidays for back to school or some of those seasons. There are a lot of smart things we can do. This isn't about what you're going to do, what they're going to do. It is about what each of the candidates is going to do, a positive vision for Minnesota, leadership for Minnesota that is willing to make investments, willing to say, here's my plan, and you can trust that I'm going to stick with it.
Mark Dayton, quick comment.
I'd just like to ask my two friends here, with a $6 billion deficit, why shouldn't someone making $1 million or $5 million or $10 million a year in income pay even $1 more in income taxes to help solve that deficit?
Tom Horner.
Senator, if that's what your proposal was, maybe we would agree on it, but that's not your proposal, and I don't know why you keep driving at that.
Either.
Senator, your proposal is you want to tax couples with a taxable income of $150,000, right?
Would you agree, Tom Horner?
Senator, wait a second, Gary. I mean, Senator, isn't that
I'll answer your question if you'll answer mine. Yes, that is my proposal.
Isn't that your proposal?
I said I'll answer my question if you'll answer mine. Yes, that is my proposal.
All right, so $150,000. Be clear on this, $150,000. A nurse and a teacher make $150,000. Right now,
that's where you don't understand the realities of Minnesota, Mr. Horner.
Senator, I do. Senator,
most people earn for a living.
Senator, I'll be happy to point out two people exactly like that who make $150,000 in taxable income. And out of that, they're already paying $50,000 in federal taxes, FICA, property taxes, state taxes. Now, on top of that, Senator, unlike what you've had to do, because as you've acknowledged many times to your credit, you've been blessed with great wealth, they still have to save for retirement. They have to save for college education. They have to pay for a mortgage. They don't have $150,000 in wealth. They have $150,000 in income, and there is a big difference between the two, Senator.
So can I ask again my question? Will you answer my question?
Yes, I will, Senator, and I have. Senator, you keep saying that, I will answer your question. You keep saying that congratulating me on my plan. It's pretty obvious that you haven't read my plan. Because when you look at what I'm proposing, a sales tax does include more tax on the wealthy, and I also have other tax provisions in there, including tax expenditures, Senator, including tax expenditures that do reform taxes.
All right, let's let Tom Emmer have his say here, and then we'll move on.
What was the question?
Would you raise taxes on people making $500,000 or more?
I'm not raising
$5 million.
Hey, Gary and Senator, I'm not raising taxes on anyone. I would reduce taxes for everyone. It's time to here's the thing, Senator, while I have a ton of respect for you and your desire to serve the community and serve the state, I got to tell you the message you're delivering is the same message we've been hearing for decades in this state, and it's not working. Every time government runs out of money, you go back to the hardworking men and women of this state, you go to the businesses of this state, and you simply tell them to pony up more money. That's not the right answer. This time, it's time to look at government. It's time to realize this state was not built by government, it was built by people. You got to lower taxes, let people start to generate jobs again. It's about bringing jobs back to Minnesota, not about just taking more revenue for government.
Lots of people have been standing by on the phone with questions for our candidates. You've just tuned in. This is Midday coming to you live from the Minnesota State Fair, Minnesota Public Radio Day at the fair. Come on out to Carousel Park. If you're out here at the fair, make sure you bundle up before you come out. It's a little nippy today, but it's getting better. Wind's starting to die down. Candidates on stage, Republican Tom Emmer, DFLer Mark Dayton, Independence Party candidate Tom Horner. We have a full bank of callers, audience questions. Let's take a caller with a question. Kathy, that would be you. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much. I'm getting sick to death of some of this backbiting and accusations, and of course we can throw numbers and statistics all over the place and tweak them as we please. But my question is the broader question. What is your vision for Minnesota Do we all rise and fall together? Do some of us do better than others? And what difference can the one person who becomes governor really make for us ordinary folks? And please be positive on your answers.
All right. Well, let's zero in on the last part of Kathy's question. What difference does it make for the average person in the state if you become governor? How are you going to benefit people around the state? Let's, Mark Dayton, why don't you go first?
That's an excellent question. First of all, I'd make taxes fair, and I would use that revenue to balance the budget responsibly, and I'd also cut spending, which means that we'll be able to continue essential services to the state of Minnesota, like police and fire and better highways, and then I'll invest in education. Education is the key to our future. It's the key to our children, grandchildren's future, and all of our success. I'll invest in early childhood education. I'll invest in better K-12 education, invest in higher education, make college tuition affordable once again for Minnesota families. If we have the best educational system in the world, we'll be able to be successful in job creation. We'll be able to be successful in a global economy that's going to be more challenging than anything we've faced for the last 50 years, and we'll create a better Minnesota.
Tom Emmer.
You know, Gary, first I'm going to agree with the caller. I think most Minnesotans, regardless of what their political philosophy is, are sick and tired of people pointing the finger backwards and trying to assess blame. I think what we're about is looking forward and setting out, articulating the vision that we have for the future of this state. And the difference is very simple. On the one side, you talk about investing in education, investing in all these different things, but you know what? You can't invest if you don't have anything to invest. The future for this state is not just redesigning government so that it's efficient, so that it can actually provide the services in a sustainable and affordable manner that people expect, but we got to bring jobs back to the state of Minnesota. We got to start growing our private economy, growing jobs so that we can drive revenues, more revenues. It's not about just taking from the private sector anymore. It's about growing jobs in the private sector, which ultimately pays for what we all need out of government.
Tom Horner.
I believe it is only a governor who can set a vision, who can set a tone. But it also is the recognition that a governor is only one person. And a governor needs to build consensus. A governor needs to have honest conversations with all the people in Minnesota. A governor can't drive wedges. A governor has to be a person who says, let's find that common ground. Let's build the consensus where all Minnesotans can come together and move the state forward. And so part of that is laying out a specific plan, but then being willing to sit down with Democrats, Republicans, and independents to be the political lightning rod to say to everyone, if you come to the table, take the tough votes, I'll take the political hit for you. And while I would never go into office promising to be a one-term governor, because you can't be a lame duck from day one, I've always said that for me, in my career as a business person in community service around public policy and politics, this isn't a stepping stone to something else. This is a capstone for me and my career as a Minnesotan. And if being a political lightning rod means that we get Minnesota moving forward, but the consequences are that I don't get reelected to a second term, I'm okay with that.
Facebook question from Margaret. Margaret sends in a Facebook question saying there is a political billboard in my neighborhood that says, quote, more taxes equal less freedom. What does this slogan mean to you? Tom Horner.
Well, I think, we all would agree that nobody likes to pay taxes, so I haven't seen that billboard, so I can't say specifically what the billboard means. But let me tell you what I do think about Minnesota's responsibility and our opportunity. I think we need tax reform. I've put out a very specific plan for tax reform. But I also think that all Minnesotans need to pay a fair share. And I think all Minnesotans need to have a little bit of skin in the game so that we all pay at least a little bit, so that we see the cost of government. We understand that there is a price to government so that we can all have a stake in holding it accountable. That's why I've laid out the plan that I have. It is a plan that is going to allow Minnesota to grow through business growth, through economic development, but it's also a plan that's going to allow Minnesota to grow through investments in early childhood education, in a strong education system, not just K-12, but cradle to grave, where we invest in health care, older adult services, where we make those decisions that say we are a great state, we need to build to be an even greater state.
Tom Emmer?
I thought you said that was Margaret that sent that Facebook? That's not fair that Margaret Kelleher is sending those things in here. The sign that she's talking about, it's very simple. The more government takes out of our pocket, the less we are able to do to create a better quality of life for ourselves, to create new opportunities for other people. We got to remember that this country, again, was built by people, and that the old adage that a rising tide lifts all boats. We got to quit pointing the fingers at one another and start celebrating success of each other. We are all in it together, but we got to have people with resources to create jobs in this state. That's what that is all about.
Mark Dayton.
Government should take as little as possible from people, and only what's absolutely necessary to provide services that we cannot provide individually for ourselves. The reason that I'm endorsed by Minnesota professional firefighters, by the Minnesota police and peace officers, the law enforcement community, is because they recognize that their ability to provide us with freedom and safety is a function of government dollars, our tax dollars, our educational system, providing every child a chance to learn and to have a full opportunity in our life is paid with our tax dollars. As little as absolutely necessary, provide the best possible services. That's more freedom.
Back to the audience here. Jim Bickle.
Thank you, Gary. I'm here with Ron from Plymouth, who has a question about working with other elected officials.
They say that politics is the art of compromise, and we sure want to avoid gridlock by the next governor. Can you compromise with the other parties?
Mark Dayton?
Yeah, absolutely, and Rudy Perpich had a sign on his wall, if I'm governor, I'll put it back. None of us are as smart as all of us. And we take all good ideas from everywhere, and one of my proudest accomplishments in the U.S. Senate, my last year, I worked with Senator John McCain, Senator Ted Stevens, may he rest in peace, who was then chair of the House Senate Appropriations Committee, to get the first federal funding for the Beyond the Yellow Ribbon program, a pioneering project of the Minnesota National Guard to provide supportive services to returning Iraq and Afghan war heroes to Minnesota and to help their families and their reintegration into society. And that is exactly what I'll do, reach out to everyone to work together to accomplish what's good for Minnesota.
Tom Emmer, can you work with the Democrats?
Oh, yeah. Actually, very well. Somebody laughing? Yeah, no, you come down to the legislature and you'll see I have as good a relationships with folks on the other side of the aisle as on my own. But you know what? There's a bigger answer to this question. In this state, we've got a problem with the process. You know, by Constitution, the governor's got to put out a balanced budget proposal within the first 4 weeks or so after the session begins. The problem is, that's where the legislative process should begin and put its cards on the table, and instead, we just work on everything but the budget until the 11th hour on the last day. There's a proposal that I think should be passed by the legislature immediately in January of 2011. It's called First Things First. Under this proposal, it would give the governor an additional tool beyond the unallotment tool that the governor has right now. This tool would allow a governor to declare a fiscal emergency, which is simply defined as your revenues are not going to meet your expenses. Once that fiscal emergency has been declared, the legislature has 45 days to put a balanced budget on the table. Imagine what would happen if the governor put out a balanced budget at the end of January, early February, and the legislature had to put its cards out on the table by mid-February, end of February. Now you could figure out where you agree and get those off the table, figure out where your points of disagreement are so that you could figure out how to solve them within the time that's allowed under the session. It'd solve a lot of the gridlock and solve a lot of the special session garbage this state has had for years.
Tom Horner, could you work with the Republicans and Democrats? No legislators at the backing you up.
No, but a couple of things. I mean, remember that the first 2 years of Jesse Ventura's term were very successful, got a lot accomplished, in part because he appointed what might have been one of the best cabinets Minnesota has ever had. But I think even more than that, you know, it's pretty hard to find common ground when you say we can find common ground as long as everything is done through more tax increases, or we can find common ground as long as everything is done through spending cuts. In other words, we can find common ground as long as you agree with only what I'm saying. That's not how you meet in the middle. That's not how you reach common sense solutions. I mean, I agree that a rising tide lifts all boats, but that tide doesn't rise if we take off the table the importance of equality, if we take off the table the challenges of school districts around the state that have had to go to 4-day weeks because we only focused on cutting spending, or if we say to our most vulnerable, I'm going to make you pay for my presidential ambitions because I don't want to face the wrath of a part of the certain party. I mean, the reality is that look what we've had over the last several years. Why would you expect if you do the same thing for the next 4 years, it's going to change? And so, look, if you want bold leadership in the governor's office, that has to start with bold voters on November 2nd.
Quick question before we wrap up. We only have a minute here, but the new Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, Lori Gilday, has been traveling the state, sending out a clarion call saying the court system is, really needs some extra money, a lot of extra money. If you're elected governor, will the court system get extra money? Tom Horner.
Well, I think there are two things. One, it does need some extra money, and secondly, we also can do some things better, and we've put out a specific proposal for that.
Tom Emmer?
You need to fund your priorities in the judiciary. A fair and open, accessible judiciary would be a priority.
Mark Dayton?
When I was elected state auditor, Republican Governor Arnie Carlson said to me, you're an independently elected constitutional officer, I'll send your budget to the legislature as you submitted. The Chief Justice is responsible for the administration of the courts. If I'm governor, I will send her budget to the legislature as she submits it.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time here, but we want to give the candidates one last chance to make a pitch for your support, if you haven't decided who you support yet. And so let's do this in alphabetical order, 30 seconds, and Julie will keep time here. Do it in alphabetical order. DFL or Mark Dayton?
Thanks very much, Gary. And this election is about the future of Minnesota. It's about your future. It's about investing in the future of this state with education. It's about investing in better highways, about investing in job creation. I bring 35 years of commitment to public service with 10 years of operating experience heading 3 different state agencies. I know how to make government work better for the people of Minnesota. I know how to make government create jobs, help in the private sector, and partnership with the private sector. And if we work together, we'll make this a better state, guaranteed.
That's DFLer Mark Dayton. Next up, Republican Tom Emmer.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, MPR. Thank you to everybody who has come out and braved this beautiful summer day at the State Fair. Thank you for being here. 2 things. One, we got a clear choice on November 2nd. You can either take the way we've been doing it for the last several decades, raise revenues, which means raise taxes, or you can do it a new way. Let's streamline government, lower taxes, put people back to work. Here's the choice. On the one hand, you got somebody who will take all the money out of your pocket. On the other hand, you got somebody who wants to tax the shirt off your back. We offer a different direction for the state of Minnesota. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's Republican Tom Emmer. All right, hold on. Independence Party candidate Tom Horner.
Well, I believe it is a clear choice, and I believe that choice is all about leadership. Who has the experience, the ability, the skills, the commitment, the temperament? Who do you trust to take Minnesota forward? Somebody who has put out a clear and specific plan, who is willing to put out specific ideas that talk to all Minnesotans about how we do need a smarter, more efficient government, but how we also need to make some good investments for the future. I need you to be the leaders as voters that you want for a leader in the governor's office. Thank you very much.
Darn good discussion. Good audience. Thank you.